Let me know if you need the Zoom info.
I got it. And join without video, probably.
Yeah, because we got you on the owl, so you're pretty much set front and center.
I can share screen though.
Yep, and
Mute myself.
yep. Right. We just have a couple minutes and then I can start recording.
Just start. Thank you.
It's amazing how long a minute is.
How short and how long it can be.
Yeah.
I guess that was. Okay, great. All right, we're gonna get started. And I'm gonna call this hearing to order. It's 3 o'clock on May 23rd, 2024. And we're here for a site plan and activity review, approval. And special review of a caretaker dwelling unit. But before we get to that, are there any comments or additions to the agenda? Okay. All right, then the order of business that we have on the agenda today, again, is a site plan and activity envelope review and special review for a caretaker dwelling unit for the applicant Monastery Road LLC. And I think, if you'll just, let everybody know who's speaking. And we're gonna start with staff.
Okay, Franco Palumbo, planner with Pickens County. Again, request is for activity envelope, site plan review approval. To construct a single family residence, accessory residential and agricultural structures. GMQS exemption and special review for a CDU. We have the representatives here of the applicant. Applicant is Monastery Road LLC. Representatives, we have Cody Horn and Glenn Horn of Davis Horn Incorporated. Properties on Monastery Cutoff Road. It's a meets and bounds property. The zoning is RS 30 and it is conforming with 37 acres. Existing conditions, property is not developed. It does have the 60-foot road easement that has Monastery Cutoff Road traversing through it. There's an existing dirt driveway that goes up to the site. Typically, activity envelopes and site plan review and special review for CDUs are administrative review. However, we had neighboring property owners object to the proposal. And so those objections are within your packet. The objection from a neighbor objected that the CDU should not be permitted in the RS 30 zone district. And both neighbors did hit on the taxing of the water table up on the Shield O Mesa. The other objector in addition, finds that the proposed residence is sprawled and will disrupt an unnecessary amount of wildlife habitat. We've had, referral agencies, talk, about this project, and they had their, time to discuss and review this, proposal. So running through, the code sections, site plan and activity envelope review. Staff recommends that, the activity envelope as proposed meets the standards of the code. Priorities for locating activity and development. The applicant demonstrates careful consideration of development along slopes less than 30% and is not discernible from areas, within the view plane corridors. Site preparation and grading. Existing drainage, basins, will remain the same. There is a proposed dry well, to capture any runoff that isn't infiltrated into the soils. And there's some standard, conditions of approval that are baked into, the site plan and grading, standards. For steep and potentially unstable slopes, the applicant shall provide adequate engineering of any retaining walls, and there are a couple retaining walls that are proposed. And any retaining wall over 4 feet will need engineering. And then for geologic hazards, staff recommends that the applicant comply with the soil engineering report to be conducted prior to building permit. And this site is mapped within severe wildfire areas. And so the applicant did submit a wildfire assessment report, and so they will have to conform to any of the conditions that wildfire expert submitted, in addition to the applicable code standards for severe and general. Going over to wildlife habitat, this site is mapped within the elk winter range. So with that in the code, high impact recreational uses and are prohibited, and dogs within the elk winter range shall be kenneled. And then scenic review, I went out with the site visit with Cody Horn, and we looked through a binoculars essentially. And the site is visible from Capitol Creek, but the location of the structure itself is not visible with the story pole being erected out there. Landscaping and vegetation protection. Going out there is no large trees, and so vegetation is gonna be, no trees are gonna be removed from the site. And the applicant intends to maintain the existing native landscaping and vegetation that is out there. Any sort of landscaping to be changed is gonna be for wildfire mitigation. And then the lighting section, yeah, the applicant proposes all lighting will be meeting the standards of the code. And solar roof readiness, and this is for any new development with new buildings. The development will be meeting the guidelines for solar readiness. And then with one of the things about the driveway orientation, we try to have it, in that north-south axis, but because there's an existing driveway already, why do more work on the site, whereas you could just use what you have, and that's what the applicant is proposing, is to use the existing driveway entrance. So approximately 67% of the driveway will be contained within that 30%, that 30 degrees of the north-south axis. And the applicant has submitted a landscape plan, and the landscape plan is meeting the guidelines consistent with the codes sections. And then roads, driveways, and parking. The site plan does show sufficient amount of parking for the additional use of the CDU. And then we also went back and asked the fire department if the retaining walls around the hammerhead is gonna be impacting of any not wildfire, but fire, work and the, I think it's a Roaring Fork Fire, said that it's not gonna be an issue for, firefighting activity. There is a proposed OWTS system, on-site wastewater treatment system. And the referral agency from environmental health said that there's gonna be a sufficient area for the OWTS, but they would like a soils engineer report just to make sure, the proper sizing prior to installation of a OWTS on site.
Okay,
And then the sections for CDU. The CDU is approximately gonna be 981 square feet, and it's not gonna exceed the maximum 1,000 net livable square feet. The applicant shall de-restrict or other permanent commitment guarantee for the CDU. And just something that I also tossed in there as well, just to kind of like ease all this the water table stuff, is I pulled the permit for the site
mhm,
well permit 265214. And it talks about what that well permit is good for, and of course, it's 3 single family dwellings. And if we include the CDU as one of those, it is still being used for the proper uses on site. And then renewable energies, I don't know if I don't believe there's any solar to be proposed, but if there is, the applicant will have to.
standard.
Exactly. And then the agricultural building, there is gonna be a greenhouse on site. The property may have a greenhouse up to 1,600 square feet, and they are proposing a greenhouse of 1,597 square feet. So that is compliant with the zoning standards, and they are allowed to use that with that well as well. So with that, staff recommends approval of the Monastery Road LLC activity envelope and site plan review, GMQS exemption, and special review for a caretaker dwelling unit, subject to the conditions of approval and the attached determination.
Okay,
And that's it.
thank you. I'll go to the applicant and then,
Cool, I have a short presentation too.
okay, great.
Just cover
Let me
a few more
stop sharing.
things. Come into there, yeah. All right. That's kind of small. I'll do my best. Well, I'm Cody Horn. I represent Linda Cameron, who controls the Monastery Road LLC. With me is my coworker, boss, and father, Glenn Horn, and Trevor Mountjoy, project manager for Linda Cameron, who's been very helpful with the conception, submittal, and review of this project, coordinating neighbor site visits to answer questions on the proposal, which is requesting an activity envelope site plan for a house of 3,448 square feet. Of that, 749 square feet is a garage, 564 is a shop, 981 square feet is a CDU through special review for a detached unit on a conforming size track. 1,597 square feet is for a greenhouse agriculturally exempt from GMQS. There will be a deed restriction for agricultural use only for the greenhouse. And a total of 5,742 square feet of residential floor area in total on the property. Just an overview, we have our noteworthy landmarks on the screen: Aspen, Highlands, Buttermilk, and Snowmass Village ski areas. If you travel down the Roaring Fork Valley along Highway 82 from Aspen, you access Shieldo Mesa from Watson Divide Road. Properties indicated on this red star atop the Shieldo Bluffs Manco Shale Formation, which bifurcates Snowmass Creek Valley with the Capitol Creek Valley. The property is bordered on the north, east, and south by single-family residential tracts and a steep drop-off to the west into Capitol Creek Valley, as well as the St. Benedict's Monastery. So this is a 37-acre conforming tract in the RS30 zone district. And as you can see, as indicated here in red, most of the surrounding tracts are substandard in size, ranging from 4 to 7 acres. The primary objection that we received was from owners of this tract and this tract. A 4 and 5 acre substandard sized tract, 2 of 28 other substandard sized tract. So as you can see, our property is one of several few 30+ acre tracts within a fabric of non-conforming tracts that are substandard in size in the RS30 zone district. Now, the RS30 zone district prescribes 1 lot per 30 acres as the maximum amount of sustainable development density to avoid impacts to wildlife and strains on the water table. However, the objections that we received happen to come from the owners of these substandard sized lots and are the reason we're here before you today, taking this from an administrative review to a hearing officer review. Those issues and concerns that they raised centered around scenic impacts, wildlife, and water. These concerns also happen to be the primary focuses of our planning team during the conceptual phases of the project. The first of which being scenic view protection standards. We performed extensive visual impact analysis to comply with the scenic view protection standards from the designated scenic view plane corridors. The first one being the Snowmass Creek corridor and the Capitol Creek corridor. The property is not visible at all from the Snowmass Creek corridor as its location on the far side of the Shieldo Mesa. It was really challenging to site the structures on the property without breaking the ridge line as viewed from the Capitol Creek corridor. We conceived multiple architectural concepts, site plans, to create a structure roof line that didn't break the ridge line whatsoever. As Franco said before, he came out with us and we used story poles and a high-powered telescope to verify that no structure will be visible upon construction. The result is a specifically located subgrade and single-story concept design, providing a really nice horizontal human scale development pattern, which complies with the intent of the scenic view protection standards to maintain that natural skyline silhouette. However, these scenic review standards are not intended to minimize scenic impacts to neighboring properties. There is a policy, not a standard, in the code that requests that we maintain neighborhood compatibility. And as you saw on the site, Shieldo Mesa development pattern consists of these scattered houses across the mesa. There's not a strong method to the madness in development. And given that pattern of development, our proposed house structure, CDU and greenhouse, does conform to that neighborhood character, as well as preserves the rural character of Pickett County as evaluated by the code. Our next focus was wildlife elk habitat. This map is just a quick snippet from the GIS parcel viewer. The vertical lines show elk winter concentration area. The horizontally hatched lines show severe winter range. And this sort of spackled red is the migration corridors. The entire map is within the elk winter range. And so that's really the only constraint on the subject property, but it's not a critical habitat area. Curtis Tesh, as we talked about before, met neighbors on the property, which is highly unusual, to answer questions and sort of let them know the situation. There may be elk on the mesa, doesn't necessarily mean it's critical. We're talking sort of dozens versus hundreds and thousands for the protected areas. CPW didn't have any objections. Curtis mentioned again that the biggest strain on wildlife is probably the development of substandard sized lots, increasing the density over that which was intended for the Shieldo Mesa. CPW did offer a few conditions of approval, given it is winter range and a human bear conflict area. And the applicant has reviewed those and agrees to comply with all imposed conditions. And finally, we have water. The well permit legally entitles the property to 3 single-family dwelling units and 1 acre of irrigation. We both know that physical and legal water supply are 2 different things, so we went and got a well test, and those proposed uses should be capable of serving this type of production with 15 gallons per minute. The well was tested at 13 gallons per minute, which is a very promising yield for this intensity of use. And again, in fact, the 30 substandard size tracks in Shielda Mesa are likely why the aquifer is taxed and the neighbors have concerns about water production. So just as a quick, and again, just really drives our point home, it's littered with substandard size tracks, and so there's a higher density than was ever intended. So quick overview, we're proposing a total of 5,742 square feet of residential floor area, 1,597 of agricultural floor area exempt from GMQS. And we are requesting special review for a CDU. Our request does conform to the code criteria for CDU in chapter 4, as well as the process in chapter 2. Special review is the process by which a use is allowed if reviewed and approved in accordance with these sections. Special review uses are not exemptions, they're not variances, nor do they indicate any preferential treatment. It's just what they call this type of review. But they are subject to the applicable land use code regulations. Otherwise, we have reviewed the conditions of approval and we find them acceptable. We do have one correction on page 10, note 7G.
I think I got this,
Yeah, they reference
11A.
11A, and
Okay.
it should just be 7A.
I have a note about that when we get to the determination.
Cool. But otherwise, that's all we have, and we understand the concerns from the neighbors and construction fatigue, and that this isn't a traditional subdivision. It was back of the napkin land division that created substandard sized lots, and that taxes things like aquifer and impacts wildlife. It just so happens, despite when we're developing, that we're a conforming size lot, and that we're a property for which this type of RS30 zone district addresses.
Okay. Thank you. I think we'll listen to public comment before I get into my comments and questions. I don't think we have anybody in the room here for public comment, right? Okay. So Bonnie, you can,
Yeah, we don't have any other attendees that you cannot see online. Franco, who is our gentleman?
That's rough.
Ralph, can you hear us? Everything's good? You're more than
I can hear you.
perfect. So we're open to you.
Okay, I'm Ralph Gunning. I'm a neighboring property. I'm actually looking out my window right now. I can see the property. I'll be able to see all the structures. My only concern is I don't have anything to say as long as everybody's staying within the boundaries of Pickens County and their code. Cody mentioned he's conforming to all Pickens County codes, but he also used intent quite a few times. And if you go to the GMQS, the purpose of it, I'm going to quote it. Section B, it says a type of growth in the rural area that is consistent with the existing rural character of the area and helps to maintain the distinction between the rural area and urban areas. So in my mind, I see 4 structures. From where I'm sitting right now, I'll be able to view all 4 structures. 4 structures on one lot seems like a sprawl to me. And in section C of 61010 of the GMQS, it says a means of directing growth into appropriate locations that is containable and will not promote sprawl. Again, in section J, preservation of important rural and backcountry lands. So are we protecting those lands, backcountry lands, and are we being appropriate is all I have to say. If they're allowed to do it, they're allowed to do it. I can't really say anything about it. As far as the water goes, if they're within the requirements of having, I don't see why they need to have all those structures built apart. And I really do know why, and it's because the applicant is going to be housing her employees up here. And there's going to be multiple people going by my house, more than a single family dwelling would have. The detached garage will be a separate structure. There'll be a separate one person or couple living there, as well as the shop. And eventually that greenhouse will probably turn into another structure, in my mind. So those are my concerns is they're housing employees up there. This isn't a single family home that we're used to seeing. This is going to be a place where she's going to house her people. And that's what's going to happen because she's done it down at Shield Mesa and other places that I know about, which I shouldn't even be saying, but it's a fact. And that's all I have to say.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Gunning. It says Franco's name on it, so
Yeah, that's-
I want to make sure that I get your name correct, and thank you for your comments. That is why we're here today, to kind of go through a process where I can sit and I've read, you know, some of the correspondence from you and some other concerned neighbors about this application, and, you know, regardless of the decision that's made, that this is part of the process to hear that and kind of talk through some of these things to explain where we get to this decision. So thanks everybody for their presentations. I have a couple clarifications that I'll get to. But I think to start with what the applicant, or excuse me, what staff was talking about, is there's a lot that has gone into this entire review process. This property's actually been reviewed over the last 20 years, so there's a lot of history here that was informative to me. And you know, we're not starting with a totally blank slate as part of this review process. And there's a lot of things that I'm not going to address directly because, as Franco pointed out, you know, there's many items in this application that do comply, that comply with the code, and that we're building into this approval and determination that says that the applicant will continue to comply with these code provisions as the properties develop, for things like if they have to do additional engineering for the driveway or retaining walls. So I'm going to kind of focus on the things that I'm hearing that were areas of concern. And start with kind of what you have addressed as far as, you know, views from what you're looking at, and then kind of views under the code, as well as maybe the reasons this house is designed that the way that it is. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that we, under the code, have these scenic corridors that we are required to consider as part of development. And while to some of the neighbors, it might seem odd that we're getting a telescope to look at these things from Capitol Creek, and not those same considerations aren't established for Mesa and Chateau roads. The fact is that we have to consider the scenic view corridors as like a primary area of concern for the development. And so because of that, the development for this property has been shifted to an area, and over time it's been approved in this area, that it is probably, you know, it is more visible from Monastery Cutoff, Chateau, and Mesa roads. And so, you know, I've reviewed the materials, and, you know, I see that it now complies, after extensive studying, with the scenic view corridors that we're required to comply with under the code. It is going to be visible from the neighborhood and your home, but from what I can tell, the design is sort of dictated by avoiding the scenic view corridors, as well as attempting with what, you know, the applicant's representatives talk about, this horizontal kind of design as opposed to vertical, that maybe in your, there is some clarification. I don't think that they're exact as to how many kind of separate structures there are in this development. My understanding is, the CDU, I mean, it's all sort of designed to maybe look like one single family home, except for maybe the greenhouse and some of these accessory structures. But what I'm seeing is that, you know, it complies with the code as far as scenic view corridors, and that the applicant has worked within the confines of kind of previous approvals of where this can be cited, and attempted to design something that, you know, is in keeping with the neighborhood. I do think it is important to, I agree, you know, after driving up there, that there isn't a clear development pattern. There's a lot of different looking homes up there. A lot of homes are built on the highest points of their properties to to capture their views. So I don't see, nothing that I've seen in this application suggests that this is highly out of line with like the neighborhood and what's going on. I think another thing that you mentioned. Sorry, where my notes go. With regard to, I think, the water use, you know, I sort of look to, there's a well permit for this property. It is conforming in size. And I reviewed the test, and that suggests that the water is going to be an adequate supply, and that all the development that is taking place is permitted under the code. So that's kind of where I'm shaking out in the determination as far as addressing those specific concerns. I also noted, I don't think they're here today, but there were some letters that talked about this construction fatigue, which I think, you know, I can understand how a neighborhood, especially one like up in Old Snowmass, where maybe it hasn't been a hotbed for development, especially all at once, is seeing more impacts. You know, as far as what we're focused on today, as does this development, does this application meet the code standards? There are things that are going to happen after, you know, an approval that try to mitigate the construction impacts. You know, the applicant is going to be required to submit a construction management plan, and theoretically, you know, and submit other documents that detail how this project will be managed in construction and constructed. And so hopefully that means that it's handled in a way to minimize impact. Although I think we can just agree that there are impacts from construction that are unavoidable. Another thing that I just wanted to comment about before I kind of get into the determination is, one of the most important things, the caretaker dwelling unit. So the process for this is that we're having this review process because the request is for a detached caretaker dwelling unit. And I think there's some concern that, or there was maybe some confusion about whether this was a variance or how this gets approved. And really what it is you step up into what's called special review, and there's very specific criteria that we consider in approving or not a detached caretaker dwelling unit. And I you know, if the app, so as far as impacts to the neighborhood and having more people, this could be attached and we wouldn't be here today. So as far as people who might be using it, I don't see that impacted by having it be detached or not. And that overall, we have a very specific process for how it gets approved. And we've considered that in making this determination. And I have a few tweaks to the determination as it relates to, you know, how we're kind of representing that. But overall, I tend to agree with staff's recommendation for this approval in terms of how this application has met the various standards for development under the code, which is what we're tasked with examining. So if we, you know, if there's any questions, you know, about what I'm saying, but otherwise I have a few comments to maybe build into the determination. Oh, sorry, I do, one other thing that I did want to mention about the wildfire and wildlife, I also reviewed that. Again, like I said, I'm not going to address every condition and code standard here. But the things that were maybe the more critical elements of concern. And I've reviewed the referrals and ultimately, I don't have a compelling reason to substitute my judgment for any of those experts. In terms of how they view these items and what this development is gonna require as far as considerations for wildlife, defensible space for fire. So again, that's just, I've reviewed it and I agree that based on the referrals we received, that it satisfies those standards of the code as well. And there'll be additional things that have to be considered during development to continue to meet those code standards. So it is my determination that I'm gonna approve this application for activity envelope and site plan review. And then do you want me to go ahead and just give you my comments to that actual language of the determination, or I have a few questions about like getting that typo corrected and things like that?
Maybe not typos, but anything that would be concern to you, so you guys are aware of any changes.
Yeah, the only thing, and this is maybe, if the answer from the applicant is we don't care, then, I'm not, but. We go from like the recital section and then into the actual resolutions. And I noticed that in the recitals related to. The caretaker dwelling unit and then also the greenhouse, that we sort of build in some of the conditions into the recitals, but it's not all of the conditions. So my preference would maybe tend to be to have something which I can draft, I've drafted it. But where I would make the finding that it complies with these code standards and then that the applicant will comply with the conditions as set forth, and we can reference either specific numbers or just in the determination itself. Unless you have a reason, it was just a little confusing in terms of when I read it and we talk about parking and things like that, but we don't talk about other conditions of the CDU.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to provide that, or how do you want to handle that?
That's all.
It sounds like that's, sort of a formatting.
Yeah,
Request, and I think we can, the content is
Yeah.
the same.
yes,
And so we can, if you have like red lines, I mean, I'm happy to take those after, if you're okay with that itself, especially since the content is remaining the same.
yeah, I'm not changing any of the conditions. I was just gonna change kind of how it's formatted. The one thing I was also gonna maybe clarify is that, satisfaction of the caretaker dwelling standards, but then also consideration of the specific criteria for the special review, and just acknowledge those as kind of two separate items.
My only comment, and this is Glenn Horn for the record, is, we've run into a question in the past as to whether or not the hearing officer's determination and decision needs to be issued at a meeting. And the way I would view these changes would be that they're technical clarifications to the format of the determination. But therefore, the determination would not have to be issued at another meeting, but could be made at this meeting, and then the staff can work with Avery to deal with these technical clarifications.
That's my intent, and that's what
Okay, good. I just want that to be clear for
yes,
the record. 'Cause
yes.
one time we ran into an issue with that.
This is being approved. My preference is that we clarify a couple of these recitals, as it relates to the caretaker dwelling unit.
That's fine. And,
Okay.
if Franco, works with you to, make those, clarifications to the determination and then, send a draft to Cody to
Yeah.
review.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Okay, yeah, of course. And then my other question, actually, I probably should have asked this, is just that where we reference, is there a blanket reference to compliance with the recommendations of the various referral agencies? Because you mentioned that in your presentation. And then, you know, I see it for certain items, but I didn't know if there was something that just says, or if we're just wrapping that under the applicant will comply with all the representations made in the application, part of the determination.
A lot of the. Like, so the referrals that we have, like say in environmental health, that their recommendations are kind of wrapped into the public utilities section of the code. So they were the ones that made that recommendation for having a soils report. So that they could size the OWTS correctly. So they are just kind of wrapped in there. Zoning as well, you know, nothing's gonna be approved until at building permit. Because nothing is really
Right,
finalized.
it's more part of the
It's
permitting
just more,
process.
yeah, so it's just not a blanket statement saying, if we could add one if you'd like. But it's more or less they're kind of wrapped into the specific code sections that these referral agencies are kind of tied to.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just wanted to clarify since you mentioned it in your presentation. So that doesn't change, I think, my approval of this determination and then these clarifications that we're gonna make afterwards. So I think that's it for me unless. Yeah, that's it. So, oh yeah, sorry,
That's good.
we're officially closed to public comment. And
Congratulations.
then I think this hearing is adjourned. Thank you for everybody who made comments and for everyone's work today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Avery.
All right, thanks. So I can send those red ones probably pretty quickly. I mean, they're really minor and then get them to you to review.